So we will have this recording available for you all to reference. And I will also send out the PDF of this presentation, the slide deck, to your lovely counselors that are on the call tonight. And so that they can share that far and wide with you all. So don't feel like you have to take screenshots or take frantic notes. You will have those resources afterwards that you can refer back to as you're kind of going throughout the process with your student. So tonight we're going to kind of go over a lot of general information about financial aid and the financial aid process. We'll talk through the different types of financial aid. There's lots of stuff out there that touts itself as aid. So what are we looking for? How do we apply for it? And then we'll kind of touch with a little bit more detail on that free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA form. And that's kind of the big need-based aid application, and that's a really big step in the financial aid process that your students will need to fill out and have on file at those schools that they're looking at. And then we'll talk through financial aid offers. That's kind of the biggest piece of information that you're going to get from these institutions to show you what the cost is, what aid they're eligible for, and then that remaining balance or that bottom line at that institution to really figure out if that college is going to be a good financial fit for your student and for your family. And then we'll kind of wrap up talking about the timeline. So what to expect when and how financial aid topics and deadlines and things like that kind of coincide with the college search process in your student's senior year. So as I said, there's lots of different things out there that can help with the cost of college. And so just to kind of break down those different pieces of aid a little bit, they can really, all types of aid fall into two overarching categories. We've got your gift aid and your self-help aid. So the gift aid is comprised of scholarships and grants. We call it gift aid because it's just that, it's free money. You don't have to pay that back. So these are the types of aid that we're wanting to go after with as much gusto as possible, as early on in the process as possible. So scholarships, think of these pieces of aid as rewarding your student for achievements that they've been able to gain over their high school careers. So merit scholarships for academic achievement based on ACT or SAT, talent-based scholarships based on extracurricular, co-curricular involvement in high school, maybe some athletic aid based on, their athletic prowess and wanting to continue on in a sport in college. So that's kind of where scholarships can come from, those different kind of funding sources. And this is typically the largest amount of money that you're going to get from institutions themselves. This is where the bulk of that financial aid package is going to come from, in the form of merit scholarships or talent-based scholarships. Kind of supplementing those scholarships for your student could be some need-based aid. And these likely are going to be based on that free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA form. And these could be need-based grants from the institutions themselves. They could be from the state of Missouri or Kansas if they're planning on staying in state, wherever they are. These could be federal aid. So these could be some federal Pell Grant or federal supplemental educational opportunity grant. Those things would be coming from different funding sources, and the different funding sources will have different need thresholds that they're going to offer to families based on the outcome of that FAFSA. So the biggest piece and the biggest takeaway that I want you to take away from tonight is, especially if you're a family out there that's kind of, do we file the FAFSA? We know we're not going to qualify for any federal aid, or we don't think we're going to qualify for any need-based aid. Why fill it out? I always, always, always recommend to families that they fill out the FAFSA for at least that first year, just to let the institutions make you the best offer possible. And you know that you're checking the box and not leaving any aid on the table for your student. I think that's really important. So that's gift aid. That's the free money. Again, you don't have to pay those funds back. Self-help aid is where we get into some loans or some work opportunities. These pieces of aid, of course, we call them self-help aid because they come with some strings attached. The student is taking on some responsibility to take these different pieces of aid. So, of course, in the form of loans, they're going to have to repay that money that they're taking out on the front end with interest. once it goes into repayment. So we're going to kind of break down some of these loan options later on in the presentation and talk through student loan options as well as parent loan options and kind of compare and contrast what your options might look like and what the best fit for your family might look like as well. Employment opportunities, by and large, are going to come from filing the FAFSA again in the form of federal work study. Some institutions might have an institutional work study award that they offer students based on need, again, at their institutions. But federal work study is a pool of money that your student would have to, go out on campus, find a job, work those hours, and then they get paid that money just like a normal paycheck, bi-monthly or bi-weekly. At SLU and at some institutions, they might just direct deposit it into a student's bank account. So this does not automatically go towards tuition or room and board. Students can use it for that, but we typically recommend that families kind of think of this as a discretionary pool of money. Think about this covering personal expenses, books and supplies that your student needs, not necessarily going against the tuition or direct charges at the institution that they're attending. So applying for these different types of aid, the majority of institutions, their admission application is going to also be the application for merit scholarships. They're going to assume if you're applying for admission, you also want to be put in the pool for some merit scholarships. That's a big question to ask as you're kind of getting into the application process at these schools. Are there supplemental scholarship applications that we have to fill out to be eligible for merit scholarships? Is there additional information that you need from my student to be eligible for merit scholarships? Is also important to ask those institutions. As we saw, testing availability get really limited during lockdown of the pandemic. A lot of schools went to a test optional policy for both admission and scholarship purposes, which wouldn't require an ACT or SAT score for admission or scholarship consideration at those institutions. We are seeing a little bit of a snapback of those policies, maybe going to like a test preferred option or a test required option. They might still be test optional for admission, but maybe they do prefer a test score for scholarship consideration at that institution. So that's an important distinction to make as you're kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of those applications as well. Are we required to submit a test score for admission and scholarship purposes? What is your test, your standardized test policy is a good question to ask those institutions as well. The need-based aid, so grants, loans, and work opportunities, those are all going to be determined based on filing that free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA. So need-based aid is going to come, like I said, maybe from the federal government, from the state, or from institutions themselves, but the majority of that need-based aid is going to be awarded based on eligibility from that federal application. Some institutions might also ask you to fill out a CSS profile. This is through the College Board. It's a supplemental need-based aid application that typically the more selective institutions are asking families to fill out. It goes into much more depth into your family financial situation than the FAFSA does, but this would be a supplement. So they're going to be asking you to file this in addition to the FAFSA in most cases. As a general rule, we say don't pay for free money, but the CSS profile is an exception to that rule. It's $25 to file with the initial school and then $15 or $16 to file with subsequent schools that you add to that profile. So it does involve a fee to file that. The free application for federal student aid, that FAFSA, is always going to be free. So that's another reason why I always recommend just fill it out. You're not paying anything. It takes about 30 minutes, an hour of your time, and it's worthwhile just to make sure that that box is checked. So studentaid.gov is the website that you're going to go to for all of the federal student aid resources. So anything related to the FAFSA, to student loans, to Parent Plus loans from the federal government, that's all going to be housed on studentaid.gov. And it's relatively easy to find that FAFSA form once you get out there. You can also just Google FAFSA form or federal need-based form, and it should be that first link that comes up. Just make sure you're on .gov. It should be studentaid.gov, where all of that information is. So FAFSA form, complete the FAFSA form. As you can see, it's right there in the menu at the very top of the page, so pretty easy to find. The 25-26 FAFSA is what seniors will be filling out this year in their senior year fall. And right now we're in kind of a beta testing phase for the 25-26 FAFSA. They actually just announced this week that the FAFSA is open to everyone that wants to get in there and fill it out, but it is still in a testing phase until they give the final go-ahead that everything is working as intended, and they're guaranteeing that the form is fully functional. So it is kind of still a little bit of a gamble at this point to get in there and file the FAFSA. If you are really eager to get it off your plate, you're more than welcome to fill it out. Just know we're still in that testing window, and they've said they are committed to making it fully available with that guarantee that everything is going to be fully functional on or before December 1. So here in the next couple weeks, it will be live and fully functional for us to be able to get in there and fill out. As I mentioned, it should be completed in your student's senior year of high school. And most need-based aid is awarded on a first come, first served basis. So typically we say file early with the FAFSA. With all of the changes that came to the form in the 24-25 aid year, and that we're seeing again in 25-26, we're just being a little bit cautious and being like the first ones to get in there and fill it out. So this year we've been using the motto of kind of like file early within reason. So take note of those FAFSA priority deadlines at the schools that your student is looking at. And if they don't have priority deadlines until February 1, you don't need to get in there right now or on December 1 to file the FAFSA. As long as it's in before that FAFSA priority deadline of February 15th, you are perfectly fine. That FAFSA priority deadline is basically saying we're going to guarantee the same amount of aid to everybody who fills out the form prior to our priority deadline. So you are well within, your guarantees to be able to get the maximum aid possible as long as you're filing by that priority deadline. And then you're going to continue to file the FAFSA if your student received any federal aid or state aid that's need-based or institutional aid. If that institution requires you to continue filing the FAFSA to still be eligible for their aid, you're going to continue to file the FAFSA each year that your student is in school. There was a bipartisan bill that was just passed out of the House that would solidify October 1 as the official open date for the FAFSA per congressional regulation. So we are going to see it go back to October 1 in subsequent years. So October, those alarm bells should be ringing every year that your student is in school to say, oh, it's time to file the FAFSA again for next academic year. So the FAFSA form is going to ask for most likely parent income and asset information, as well as the student income and asset information. So the income information that's going to be reported on the 25-26 FAFSA is actually from 2023. So you're just going to take that aid year, that first aid year that's in the year of the FAFSA that you're filling out, go back 2 years, and that's the tax information that you're going to be reporting on that year's FAFSA. So next year, for any juniors that are joining us tonight, the 26-27 FAFSA, you're going to be reporting this year's taxes, 2024 taxes, on that FAFSA form. Students, as they get into the FAFSA, are going to answer a series of dependency questions that's going to make them either dependent and have to include their parental information on the FAFSA, or independent and be able to submit their FAFSA with just their student information on it, independent of their parents. Things that would make a student independent are things like if they are in foster care, they're in a legal guardianship, they are an orphan or a ward of the court, they have dependents of their own that they are financially supporting, they're married and self-supporting. So those those kind of circumstances would make them independent, but the vast majority of students coming straight out of high school are going to be deemed dependent and have to include their parental information on their FAFSA form. The Student Aid Index, or the SAI, is what's calculated from the parent income and asset information and the student income and asset information on the FAFSA form. And that SAI essentially is a plot point. It doesn't represent any sort of dollar amount of aid that you're receiving from institutions or what you'll have to pay institutions. It is a point on the index anywhere from negative 1,500 all the way up to 999,999. So that SAI is going to be sent to all of those schools that are active on your student's FAFSA, and that's going to determine their need at that institution. So negative 1,500 is going to be the highest need, and those are going to be the students that are qualifying for maximum federal Pell Grant and maximum institutional need-based aid. The families that are on the 999,999 end of the index are likely not going to receive any need-based aid from institutions. As a general rule, if your SAI that's calculated from the FAFSA is higher than the cost of attendance at the institution that you're planning on attending, you're likely not going to receive any need-based aid. So that's kind of a good metric to use as you get that SAI back to kind of manage expectations a little bit. Should we expect any need-based aid based on what that SAI looks like? Within the FAFSA form, there's something called the Direct Data Exchange that allows you to provide consent to have the IRS share your federal tax information with federal student aid. And so for anybody that's filled out the FAFSA before, this replaced the IRS data retrieval tool. If you filed it before, you'll remember you had to actually go out of the FAFSA form, go out to the IRS site, put in your information, and it had to match exactly what was on your return. And then if they could match it, it came into the FAFSA. This year, it is much more seamless. So you provide that consent you approve the IRS to share your information. It gives you a little status message of we're reporting your information into the form, and then you get a little success message once it's successfully pulled over all of your income and tax information, and you don't have to manually enter any of that information anymore, which is super nice. Consent is required to have the IRS share that information in order for your student to be eligible for federal financial aid. So you can decline consent to be able to move on and submit the form, but your student will not be eligible for federal financial aid unless both your student and you provide consent to have your IRS information shared. And one big change that came to the 24-25 form last year was that there's kind of two different roles that you'll see when you file the FAFSA. There's kind of a parent role where you only see the parent information, and there's a student role where you only would report information about the student. And so it kind of feels like you're filing separate FAFSAs because they're completely separate, but it's still one FAFSA. Those other parties are just acting as contributors, contributing their information to that one form that each student is going to fill out every year. This year, with the beta testing being in place and things like that, again, we do recommend that you wait until that full rollout December 1 so that we have that guarantee that everything is working functionally correctly. But to kind of prepare for the FAFSA in the next couple of weeks for you senior families, the biggest piece of information that you really need to have is make sure that your 2023 taxes are on file with the IRS. That will really prolong and kind of complicate things if the taxes are not filed prior to you wanting to fill out the FAFSA. It just makes things a lot easier if they're on file with the IRS. You can provide consent and it automatically ports over into the FAFSA form. So make sure that those taxes are filed. You can also get in there and create an FSA ID. We do recommend you do this about a week before you're wanting to actually fill out the FAFSA form. The FSA ID is the Federal Student Aid ID. It's essentially a login, an account on Federal Student Aid, again, studentaid.gov. So you can go out there tonight. I would recommend that junior or sophomore, or especially freshman, wait until senior year or a little bit closer to senior year to establish that FSA ID, just so you know you have that information readily available and everything is good to go. Sometimes when folks fill it out a little too early, that information goes missing. And then it makes it a little bit harder to recover that information and make sure that everything is good to go by the time the FAFSA opens in their senior year. The student will need one, and then the parent will also need one to fill out their contributor portion of the FAFSA. If the parents are married and in the same household and they filed married filing jointly taxes in 2023, only one parent needs that FSA ID to be able to get in and complete the parent portion. So the student and at least one parent will need that FSA ID to be able to fill out the FAFSA. Parent of record is also something that is helpful to kind of figure out who is going to be the parent that's listed on the FAFSA form prior to actually getting in there and filling it out. So the parent of record, and this is only applicable for students whose biological or adoptive parents are divorced or separated or have never been married. They're going to determine as a family which parent provides more financial support for the student. And that's going to be the parent of record on their FAFSA form. The other parent would not have to be included. Their income or tax information or asset information would not need to be included. If it truly is 50-50, both parents contribute equally to the student's financial support, then FAFSA says that the parent that earns more needs to be the parent of record for the student. This is completely up to the family's discretion to kind of determine who provides more financial support for the student and who needs to be the parent of record on the FAFSA. Just as a point of clarification here, the parent of record is not necessarily one that's assuming the financial responsibility for the student or assuming tuition charges or the bill at the institution that they're attending. So the other parent can still very much be involved and help with the financing of things. They're just not going to be included on the FAFSA form. Creating a school list can also be really helpful prior to filling out the FAFSA. You can have up to 20 active schools at a time. And so we always recommend in the first submission, so as you're first filling out the form, put as many schools as you want, up to 20. Your student does not need to have been admitted to those schools. They don't need to have submitted an application for admission. So you can put any and all schools on here that are even remotely considering on your list, and then they're included, and you don't have to worry about going in and submitting a correction later on down the line. And then, as we've talked before, make note of those priority deadlines at the schools that your student is looking at. If it's February 1 for one school and then March 1 for another school, just make sure that it's filed by the earliest possible priority deadline, and then you're good to go for all of those schools that you're looking at. This gives you a little bit of additional information on the contributor piece. So either the parent or the student can start the FAFSA form on behalf of the student. If the student starts, they would fill out all of their demographic information. They would submit their student portion with their contributors of their parents included. And then the parents would get the invite to submit the parent portion and make sure that all of that is good to go before they formally submit. It can also work the opposite way. So the parent can get in there and start the FAFSA, fill out their parent portion, and invite the student to complete their student portion. You will need the following information here in this how to invite box to invite a person as a contributor. So you have to include their name, date of birth, social security number, and email address in order to add them as a contributor. And then that information has to match exactly what's on file of their FSA ID, their student aid ID login. It's also a good idea to have the following documents here in this blue box with you as you're filing the FAFSA. So even though you're going to be providing consent and have that tax information automatically ported over, it is a good idea to have your 23 return in front of you, just in case any additional tax filing questions pop up. You can easily find that information on your 1040 or as part of your return and answer those. Parents will need to report the amount in child support received for the last complete calendar year. So if you're filing the FAFSA in December, you would report however much child support you received in 2023. If you're filing the FAFSA in January, you would report 2024. It's just going to be the last complete calendar year as of the day that you're filing the FAFSA. Students and parents will also need to report some asset information like current balances of cash checking and savings accounts, and investment net worth, and businesses and farm net worth. So having that information readily available will also be helpful to kind of expedite when you're actually filing the form. So once that FAFSA is filed and it's sent to all of the institutions that your student is considering and that's included on their FAFSA, these institutions are going to create a financial aid offer that shows you, here's all of our costs associated with our institution, here's all of the aid that your student has been deemed eligible for, and here's your remaining balance, what it's going to cost to attend for one academic year. One thing of note here is that these are still a marketing tool for these institutions. So it's important to really look at these with a keen eye and make sure you're fully digesting all of the information that they're showing you and not just scrolling all the way down to see what that remaining balance is. These can be a little bit misleading sometimes with the types of aid that they're showing you. So it's important to kind of understand what costs are they showing you. Are they showing you direct cost only? So how much I'm going to owe in tuition and room and board, or are they showing me a holistic cost of attendance that includes things like books and supplies and transportation and personal expenses for my student? What type of aid are they showing? Are they showing only gift aid, or are they showing you, here's your remaining balance with the student loan taken out and a Parent Plus loan taken out, and your remaining balance is zero out of pocket? So really looking at these, like I said, with a discerning eye and making sure that you are really kind of mindful of what they're showing you in terms of cost and aid. And sometimes looking at those offers, the lowest remaining balance isn't always going to be the best value or the best financial fit. So making sure that you're cognizant of, okay, this is a remaining balance of zero, but they're showing me a $40,000 Parent Plus loan, and that's not going to be feasible for us. So, like I said, that can be helpful as you kind of get these financial aid offers and start to kind of digest this information a little bit. One of those pieces, as I said, is kind of looking at what costs they're showing you. So the difference between direct costs and cost of attendance is kind of laid out here on the slide. It's important to make this distinction because the school that shows the full cost of attendance, that includes things that are going to be owed to the institution, as well as those estimates for things like books and personal expenses and transportation expenses and things like that. They're showing you a more holistic cost of attendance, and they're going to look more expensive because they're factoring those indirect costs in there as well. So those indirect costs, those estimates that are in blue here, are things that really you should be considering at all of the different institutions that your student is looking at. And they're going to be a little bit different based on the type of institution, right? So transportation costs are going to be different for your student if they're planning on staying in Kansas City versus if they're coming to St. Louis or if they're going to California. So the difference of those is going to be important to kind of take into consideration. And we're going to have to work into the family budget that you're going to have to buy a plane ticket to come home rather than just coming home by car or something like that. So important to think of those holistic expenses as you're kind of trying to figure out where is going to be the best financial fit for your student. These little graphs show how institutions are calculating your need. So it can be kind of hard as we kind of get into these conversations with families about financial aid and financial need, because families, regardless of how much you make and how much income you're bringing in, everyone says, well, of course we need aid. We need aid to make this work. But this is how schools are actually calculating what need-based aid goes to what families. So they're going to take their cost of attendance, which is of course going to be variable for all of those different institutions. If you think of the 1 here being for your private schools, the 2 being for your publics, and then 3 being community colleges, the cost is going to differ quite a bit based on the type of institution, whether it's in-state, out-of-state, that sort of thing. So they're going to take their cost of attendance at their specific institution. They're going to subtract out that student aid index that is the result of filing the FAFSA. And then your need is going to be that XYZ on the far right there. So your need at a 4-year private institution is going to be much higher than at a 2-year community college because of the difference in cost. So you could qualify for need-based aid at a private school and not at a public school because that need is different. So hopefully that kind of puts into perspective how we're calculating a little bit. One of those pieces of need-based aid is a subsidized loan. So just by filing the FAFSA, your student is eligible for a federal direct student loan in their name. It does not matter what that SAI is, how much the family income is, they will qualify for this loan just by filing the FAFSA. This is a student loan, so it's in your student's name. And it's not credit qualifying. So it's a fixed interest rate for any student who takes out this loan for that aid year. For 24-25, it was 6.5% was the fixed interest rate for these federal direct student loans. And freshmen are eligible for $5,500 in this direct student loan. Based on need at their institution, they could be eligible for a portion of their direct loan to be subsidized. So if they have enough need at the institution after all of their aid has been awarded, they could be eligible for $3,500 of that $5,500 to be subsidized. And the subsidy there is that it's not accruing interest while the student is in school. So if your student was eligible for a full $3,500 subsidized loan their freshman year, they're going to have $3,500 in a subsidized loan and $2,000 in an unsubsidized loan. That unsubsidized loan would be accruing interest while your student is in school, but repayment for both the subsidized and unsubsidized loan is deferred until after your student graduates. So repayment is exactly the same for both the sub and unsub, but it's just how the interest is accruing on the subsidized versus unsubsidized loans. There's going to be a little bit difference in eligibility based on credit in school as well. So freshmen, as I said, get that $5,500 for students that are dependent. For students that are independent, they have higher lending limits in that student loan because they don't have parents that are able to support them financially. Sophomore, so once you hit that 30 credit threshold, they're eligible for $6,500. And then once they get 60 plus credit hours, they're eligible for $7,500, again, for those dependent loan limits. So outside of institutional aid, federal aid, state aid, and that student loan, some additional things that can kind of help drive down that cost of attendance. One of those is outside scholarships. So we call it outside scholarships just because it comes from outside of institutions themselves. So the general rule for these is that we recommend that families start as local as possible. So start with your high school counselor and asking, are there any scholarships specific to our high school, specific to our district, specific to our city, and kind of work your way out as you're looking for those outside or private scholarships. Ask your employer, ask your church, your Rotary Club, the Junior League, all of those associations that are kind of local to you. They might have some smaller scholarship opportunities that they offer for students that are college bound. So those can be a good way to kind of add up a little bit of aid and help drive down that cost of attendance as well. As your student receives these scholarships, you can just let the aid offices know that they are anticipating some outside aid and they can add them to their financial aid offer. Another question as you're kind of getting into comparing and contrasting some schools is their outside scholarship or private scholarship policy. So some schools will displace their aid that they've already given your student based on outside or private aid that they're bringing in. So an institution might say you qualified for a $25,000 merit scholarship. And then your student says, I have a $1,000 Chick-fil-A scholarship, and the school would then reduce their merit scholarship down to 24,000, and your student would bring in the 1,000 to bring them up to net that original 25. It is a little bit of an antiquated process that is going away at a lot of places, thankfully, but there are still some institutions that operate that way. So it is important before your student goes out and applies for, a ton of outside or private scholarship, making sure that they can actually bring that in and it's going to add on top and stack on the aid that they've already been deemed eligible for. College savings plans or 529 plans. From an institutional side of things, we recommend that families reach out to the provider of the college savings plan or 529 plan just to kind of see what that authorization process looks like and ask how they authorize those funds to come from the plan to the institution directly. It is a good idea to allow the funding to go to the school directly rather than passing through your hands first. There can be some additional tax implications there. But for those that live on the Missouri side of Kansas City, Missouri Most is the state 529, and they have what they call kind of like a pass-through option. So even if you haven't established a 529 plan and you're not using it kind of for the investment purposes of saving and investing over the past 18 years, you can still put funds in that 529 plan and then pay the institution 48 hours later and get the same tax benefit that you would if that money was sitting in there for 18 years. So that can be a good way to kind of help a little bit on the back end with those large tuition payments that you're paying out of pocket anyway. These are some good options to look for private scholarship searches. Like I said, the general rule here is that you just want to start as local as possible and kind of work your way up to the FastWebs or the College Boards. Those are going to have thousands of scholarship opportunities that thousands of students are applying to. So it's important to kind of maximize your chances of getting some of that aid. My Scholarship Central is a great resource for Missouri students to be able to find some additional private scholarship money through those local organizations. This seems kind of elementary, but the financial aid offer is essentially going to show you this calculation, right? It's going to be all of the costs associated with attending that institution, minus all of the aid that your student has been deemed eligible for, and then that remaining balance. So once you have that remaining balance, there's really 3 ways to be able to cover that balance at the institution. The first is out of pocket. So you're looking at that remaining balance and saying, okay, we can make this work with our family budget. Maybe not in a lump sum at the beginning of the year or beginning of the semester, but we could put this on a payment plan and make this work with our monthly budget. Or maybe we're going to pay a lump sum out of the college savings plan or 529 plan, and then we're going to put the remaining on a payment plan for the rest of the year. Asking institutions about what their tuition payment plans look like can be really helpful to kind of get an idea of, is there any benefit for paying upfront in a lump sum? What are my payment plan options in terms of enrollment fees or interest that's accruing on that balance while I'm paying it off? So having an idea of that as kind of the full financial picture is helpful before you make that decision as well. If you're looking at that balance and saying this is not going to work out of pocket, even if it's on a payment plan, you're looking at some additional financing options in the form of either a Parent Plus loan or a private student loan. So this next slide kind of compares and contrasts the Parent Plus loan option versus a private or alternative loan. The Parent Plus loan option, of course, is a parent loan. So it's a credit qualifying loan that would be in the parent's name that would benefit the student's education. These can never be passed to the student. So this is always going to be on the parent's responsibility to pay back. With private or alternative student loans, most likely the student is going to be listed as the borrower. But since a lot of 17, 18-year-olds don't have a lot of credit built up, parents are likely going to be listed as co-signers on these private or alternative student loans. There are also private parent loan options that if you want to see what interest rate you might be able to apply for and see what you can get based on your credit, you're more than welcome to do that with the parent as the borrower there. The Parent Plus loan is just like the student loan in that it's a fixed interest rate for the life of the loan when you take out that loan in that aid year. So for 24-25, it was 9.08%. And repayment typically goes into effect on the Parent Plus loan 60 days after the loan is paid in full to the school. So if you take out the loan for the academic year, half is going to pay in August for the fall portion. If they do billing based on semester, half is going to pay in January towards the spring portion of the bill. So repayment would go into effect about March of your student's freshman year or whichever year you're taking out that Parent Plus loan. Your eligibility for a Parent Plus loan or a private or alternative loan is up to the full cost of attendance minus any other aid that they've received. So if the cost of attendance is $60,000, they got a $30,000 merit scholarship, you're eligible to take out a Parent Plus loan or a private or alternative loan of $30,000. If you do take out that loan up to the full cost of attendance, you are most likely going to get a refund at the beginning of the semester or beginning of the academic year to help pay for things like books and supplies, transportation expenses, personal expenses, those indirect costs that are not being billed directly through the institution, but are still included as their full holistic cost of attendance at that institution. If for some reason the parent applies for the Parent Plus loan and is denied based on their credit, the student is then eligible for those independent loan limits in their student loan. So they would be eligible for $4,000 additional dollars in their direct loan eligibility for that year. This kind of gives you an idea of repayment on down the line with these different loan programs and the different interest rates for 24-25, what you'd be looking at in terms of a monthly payment on a standard 10-year repayment plan. And then timeline for senior year. So right now, you're hopefully your student has applied to a few schools and got those applications in and maybe doing some college visits on campus or virtually meeting with some current students or current staff or faculty to kind of learn a little bit more about academic fit and social fit at those colleges. Now you can create your FSA IDs and kind of prepare to file the FAFSA form when it opens in December, and just make sure you're filing that FAFSA form by the priority deadlines at the schools that your student is looking at. We're looking at kind of a quote unquote normal timeline this year for aid offers going out. So you should expect those after the start of the new year, most likely. But the majority of those are probably going to be in your hands March, April, so that you can make your final decisions by that May 1 college decision deadline, where you can submit your enrollment deposits, secure your place in the class at the institution that you're wanting to go to, and then accepting any financial aid at the institution that your student is planning on enrolling in. And then that summer in between high school and college is really a fun summer for your student. They're getting to do a lot of the fun things like enroll in classes and register for housing and find their roommates and maybe attend a summer orientation and pick out their bedspread and do all of that fun things. But it is also the time to kind of put the financial plan in place. So do you need to sign up for a payment plan? Do you need to make a first payment? You're most likely going to get a first bill from the institution that your student is attending over that summer, most likely in July or August, with a first payment probably being due prior to when your student actually arrives on campus to move in. So kind of anticipate that and be ready for that, have that financial plan in place. If your student is planning on taking out their federal student loan, they'll likely need to accept it in the student portal. And then they also will need to fill out the master promissory note and loan insurance counseling out on studentaid.gov. So kind of taking the cue from the financial aid office at the school that they're planning on enrolling in and making sure that they're checking their emails and doing all of the things that they need to do to make sure that everything is kind of put in place is going to be important too. I have seen a few questions roll in.
Yeah. Here, I can read them off for you, Hannah.
Okay, perfect.
Too. We had two and that were kind of about the CSS profile, which I know we didn't really talk much about, so I did want to clarify that for people. The first one could probably be for both, but when you were talking about what type of investments were going to be included as part of like that part, if you want to answer how that would differ from the FAFSA versus the CSS.
Yes. So for the FAFSA, you're going to be including investment net worth in that asset section. Things like retirement accounts, IRAs, 401ks, those are not included in your investment net worth on the FAFSA. So like I said, the CSS profile is going to go into much more detail into your financial situation. And they're going to ask, for instance, how much equity you have in your home, and value of your home. The FAFSA asks you explicitly to keep that out of your investment net worth question. So on the FAFSA, as you're answering those questions, there's a little question mark next to each of the fields that you can click on, and it'll pull up some additional information of information to include and information to omit. So you'll definitely, if you have any questions about, especially that investment net worth or business and farm net worth, click on that little question mark as you're filling it out, and you can kind of go down the list of, do we have stocks, bonds, money market accounts, all of those things would be included in that investment net worth. Do we have any additional real estate, not including the primary residence where you live? Those things would go into that investment net worth. Like I said, the IRAs, 401ks, those are not going to be included on the FAFSA investment net worth question.
And then a kind of another question that would relate to both the FAFSA and the CSS profile. Are you able to edit your answers after submitting it?
Yes. So the FAFSA, once you submit the FAFSA, there's kind of a processing window where federal student aid will be able to process, and then your student will get a FAFSA submission summary back that is kind of a full breakdown of the answers that they submitted on the FAFSA form. That's when you can really go over that with a fine-tooth comb and make sure, is everything correct? We didn't add or omit a zero anywhere. And if you do find something that you need to correct, you can go back in on studentaid.gov, log in with your FSA ID, and your student will need to go in under theirs and say they want to make a correction. And then they'll be able to go directly to that section and make a correction to that information that they put in on the form.
Awesome. Somebody else was asking how, when you're filling out or when you're deciding who's the parent of record, is it relevant, or I guess I should say, is it not relevant for married filing jointly situations, or when would that be relevant?
Yeah, so the parent of record having to figure out who is going to be included on the FAFSA is really only relevant for students whose biological and adoptive parent or adoptive parents are divorced, separated, or have never married. So if it's a two-parent household, both parents are going to be included on the FAFSA form. But if you file married filing jointly, only one parent needs an FSA ID to be able to get in and complete the parent portion. If you file taxes married filing separately, then both of you will need an FSA ID and both of you will need to get in and complete the parent portion as a contributor for your student's FAFSA.
Somebody else was again asking about that primary home value required, but I believe you said no, so.
Yeah, so yeah, just to reiterate, the primary residence is excluded on that investment net worth answer on the FAFSA form. And then I see,
Yeah, about a 529.
So 529 plans would be included as an investment in the investment net worth question for parents if the parent is listed as an owner on the account. So, and then you're only going to report the value that's in the 529 plan benefiting the student whose FAFSA you're filling out. So, I'm the youngest of four. If my parents were filling out my FAFSA form and they had a 529 for all four of us kids, they would only report in their investment net worth the 529 value that was for me on my FAFSA. So not all of the 529 plans have to be included. It's just that student. This is a good question too. So as I mentioned, you'll provide consent to have your tax information shared with federal student aid, and the family size will automatically come over with the tax return and kind of calculate how many are in the family based on who's reported as a dependent on the FAFSA or on the taxes. However, you can update that number. So the parent of record on the FAFSA does not go based on who claims the student as a dependent on the taxes. It's purely financial support. So if you have an agreement where you trade off, you know, claiming the student on your taxes every other year, it wouldn't go based on who's listed as or who that student's taxes are listed on. It's financial support. So and then we do say because there might be some discrepancies in the parent that's claiming them as a dependent, the parent of record should stay as consistent as possible. So throughout their time in school, you want to make sure that there's not major swings in income that's being reported and the SAI that's being calculated, because that can cause major differences in the aid that's being offered freshman to sophomore to junior.
No, I need
So,
more better than that. It's her school.
it's important to make sure that that parent of record stays consistent among those years in school.
Good, just one last question.
Yeah, so if the parent applied for the FAFSA themselves, do they need a new FSA ID? So FSA IDs are only about 10 years old. So if you have filed a FAFSA in the past 10 or so years, you likely already have an FSA ID. If you go to studentaid.gov and in the upper right-hand corner, it says login or create account. If you click create account and put in your information, it'll tell you if you already have an FSA ID. And then it'll kind of give you the prompts to recover that information and then get your password recovered as well. So if you try to create an account, it'll tell you if you already have one, but most likely you filed your FAFSA under the FAFSA PIN when it was that PIN. But if you have loans yourself, you likely already have an FSA ID to be able to get in there and file the FAFSA. It's tied to your social security number, so it's yours for life. But like I said, if you try and create it, it'll tell you if you already have one.
I think that's all the questions we have right now. I know that we had someone who just wanted to remind everyone about checking individual colleges' portals. Every school usually has their own portal that they utilize, so just make sure that you all are keeping track of your login information. I know that's super important. And then just also checking those portals and emails.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you all for being with us tonight. We really appreciate you spending your evening with us. As I said, we have been recording tonight, so we will send the recording and the slide deck to your counseling teams so that they can disseminate that information to you all. I am going to just flash our contact information really quick. Even if your student is not planning on attending SLU or SLU is nowhere on their list, please feel free to reach out to us. We are still more than happy to be a resource for you and your family. And miraculously, I am the only Hannah in the Office of Student Financial Services at SLU. So if you reach out to sfs@slu.edu and just ask for Hannah, you'll come to me, and I'm happy to address any FAFSA questions or anything like that you have as you're kind of navigating this process with your students. So please don't hesitate to reach out and lean on the resources that are available to you. Natalie is a great resource on the admission side. If you have any questions about your application or anything related to academics or anything like that at SLU. So please don't be a stranger, and I hope it was helpful for you all to be with us tonight and kind of learn a little bit more about the journey. But hope you all have a great rest of your Wednesday, and happy Thanksgiving.